Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Savannah. If you're new here, if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is Tuesday, June 29th, and I've got a familiar face here next to me, and that face is familiar because it is our own Amy Erkinen here with AL.com. And Amy joined us last week to talk about a case that a lot of you were pretty riled up about, and that was about a woman who was arrested facing felony charges for filling a prescription while she was pregnant. So I know that a lot of you were really interested in that case. And today, Amy has a story that is kind of following along some similar lines here. We're going to get into the similarities and the differences, but Amy wrote a story that is published this morning on AL.com about a couple, a Michigan couple, who was traveling through Alabama, headed back to Michigan, and was arrested because they had marijuana in their trunk. Not only were they arrested, they also had their toddler, an 18-month-old baby boy, taken away from them. That was in March. They have not gotten their child back. They have seen their child weekly with their foster family, but they have not gotten that child back. A lot to unpack here, Amy, but a really, really interesting story, especially on the heels of that story that so many people were upset about last week, about the story of that woman refilling her prescription. So let's just get into kind of the facts of this case, Amy. I'll let you kind of walk us through it. We'll get into the legality and all of that in a minute. But first, just tell us the story of Erica Prock and her husband, Todd Prock.
So Erica and Todd live in Hillsdale, Michigan. And Eric and Todd, the husband, had been down in Hamilton at his parents' house helping his father out around the house for a few weeks. His father had a recent medical episode, so he'd been helping with some repairs that needed doing. Erica is the only one in the family with a driver's license, so she needed to come down to Alabama to pick him up. So she basically packed herself, her child, with plans to drive overnight so the baby could sleep, pick up Todd, and head right back up to Michigan. And that basically was the plan, and that was going as planned until they hit Moulton, Alabama. On the way back, she had picked up Todd. They stopped at a Jack's and were reported, a disturbance was reported. Basically, Erica told me that she and her husband were having a loud conversation. He was smoking a cigarette about 12 feet from the car at the time. Apparently, someone may have interpreted that as a domestic disturbance. So the police responded to that call of a disturbance. And when they did, they smelled marijuana on Todd. He had smoking some marijuana prior to them arriving. And so the couple basically quickly admitted that they had some marijuana in the trunk. Marijuana is legal in Michigan for personal use up to 2.5 ounces. So I'm unclear of, whether the marijuana was obtained in Michigan. I'm not certain of that, but her husband smokes marijuana, which is legal in Michigan. Erica does not. They admitted to having it, and that is when basically this kind of descended into a nightmare for them. Erica said that the child was taken. She was charged with public intoxication and marijuana possession. Both those charges were later dropped for her, but the child was still removed to foster care. Mm-hmm. And she was later charged with chemical endangerment, which is basically exposing a child to kind of byproducts of drugs. So we talked about chemical endangerment a little bit last week. We're going to talk about it again in a second, but I just want to, if you just jumped on, let me recap really quickly for you where we are. That is a couple named Erica Prock and Todd Prock. Their 18-month-old child, who we're not naming. The three of them were in a car in Moulton, which is in Lawrence County, Alabama. So on the northern side of the state. We're headed back to Michigan. They stopped at Jack's. There is a little bit of a back and forth on what exactly happened, but somebody believes they were in some sort of altercation. They, meaning Erica and her husband, called police. Police arrive. They apparently smell marijuana. The Procks say, look, we've got marijuana in the trunk. We're from Michigan. We're headed back to Michigan. Marijuana is legal in Michigan. Todd says, I do smoke. I smoke in Michigan, again, where it is legal. They have, and this does not seem to be disputed, the Procks tell police that the marijuana is in the trunk, and that has not been disputed to my knowledge, Amy, that the police do not say that the marijuana was in the car or strewn about or anything. It was in the trunk. And
Then we get these charges. I'll repeat what you said. Erica was charged with marijuana possession and public intoxication. Todd was charged with marijuana possession, a felony charge. Now, later on, those charges against Erica were dismissed. You did mention that. Todd's were not. Erica's were. They did come back with a chemical endangerment charge.
Yes,
so
and that was 2 weeks after the initial arrest. They were charged with chemical endangerment, which is a felony.
Okay, so that's where the charges are at this point. But that day, when they are at Jack's, before they're necessarily even charged, they haven't gone to court or gone through any of that at that point. The baby is, I know it's 18 months. I'm going to say baby just because, again, we're not releasing his name here. The baby's taken away at the scene.
That's correct. And yes, both of them were taken to jail. So, they're, I can understand, to some extent removing the baby. You can't put a baby in jail with parents. I think, but the fact that Erica has had her charges dropped, initial charges dropped, I think that they were very much hoping that they would quickly be reunited with the child. The child would be placed with a family member, which didn't happen. And that just didn't turn out to be true. This has been sort of a really drawn out process. And Erica's main issue here is really the child custody. I mean, they do understand that they may face some legal repercussions for the marijuana possession. They understand it's not legal in Alabama. They definitely have some issues with the chemical endangerment charge because they said the child was not exposed to any drugs because they say the drugs were in the trunk of the car. So, that they are contesting, but the marijuana possession, they're not. But they are very concerned that their child was removed to foster care and has been in foster care for more than 3 months for an allegation involving marijuana. And that is, that is something that they simply can't understand. Erica said over and over again, if this traffic stop had happened in Michigan, they would have been stopped, possibly ticketed, maybe not even that. They would have been on their way. There would have been no sort of DHR involvement. Just the differences in the laws here are so stark that in one state, it becomes a basis for removing a child. And that has been the real heartbreaker for this family. And the fact that they feel that their child has been punished for a crime that in Michigan would not even have been punished this much. But they really feel like the burden of this has fallen on, their son. And that's where their concern is. They'd like to be reunited as a family. They, at the very least would like him moved up to Michigan to be with his grandparents who have helped care for him. But right now, as this is unfolded, they've really been stuck in Alabama for the past 3 months. They can't leave the state without their son, clearly.
Right.
So they have been camped out here, essentially trying to sort this out.
Well, and it's interesting that you said camped out because they have been living in a tent since this happened. So let's look at this a little bit kind of on a timeline. March 11th, baby is taken away. Charges again against Erica dropped later. Todd's are not. As you said, the procs are saying, look, we'll deal with the marijuana charges. We understand it's legal in Michigan. We understand it's not legal here, and we will deal with that. The issue here is a little bit twofold. Number one, it's their baby being taken away and placed with a foster family, not placed with their family, but placed with a foster family. And number two, this chemical endangerment charge. That chemical endangerment charge, I'm looking at my notes here, that came later. That was not on the same day. That came a little bit later. I think you said 2 weeks. So we know that chemical endangerment charge comes. We talked again about this a little bit last week when we were talking about the woman who refilled her prescription, her legal prescription, and was charged with a felony. But the chemical endangerment law is an interesting one. Here in Alabama, I'll let you kind of explain what it was designed for. And also, I want you to explain how that chemical endangerment law and that charge applies in this situation.
Yeah, so the chemical endangerment law was passed in 2006, and it was passed really at the height of sort of a lot of concern about methamphetamine in Alabama, in particular North Alabama, which is where a lot of these convictions occur. And the law was really intended to prevent sort of exposing kids to home-based meth labs, which were common at the time. Sometimes people would create these labs in homes with children. This actually, could be very dangerous. So the law was created with that intent in mind. However, the law was also written fairly broadly, and you've seen it used in all kinds of cases, and many times in very serious cases, not only exposure to methamphetamine, but I've seen it used in cases where children had access to, opioids, heroin, situations where there is a danger or a child was injured or even killed. Those are the situations that lawmakers really intended the law to be used. It has been interpreted very broadly since then. The most well-known is against women who use substances during pregnancy. And also, you do see several cases where the law has been invoked in cases of marijuana. If a child is near a piece of paraphernalia or near a bag of marijuana, that can be charged as a chemical endangerment charge in some places. And you see that more and more. And it's interesting because, marijuana possession can be a misdemeanor charge, but chemical endangerment is a felony charge. So sometimes you see it in cases where the marijuana possession might be a misdemeanor, but you add on that chemical endangerment, and all of a sudden someone is looking at a felony because a child is, somehow involved. So that's sort of the broad way that this law has been expanded in recent years. And these cases have been upheld by higher courts, the pregnancy cases. So it's very common to see it used that way. In this case, they are, however, the parents are saying that the drugs were in the trunk. So they are saying that there was no exposure. And Erica said over and over again that she's very protective of her son. He was born very premature. So she has said that she, really keeps any and all smoke, far away from him, does not expose him to anything like this. Even though her husband does smoke, she's made it very clear that he can't do it near her son.
Well, and we know, so I have a portion in my notes here highlighted, and somebody actually brought this up on Twitter. This is an excerpt from your story, and it's from Lawrence County District Attorney Eric Jett. And this is a quote from Mr. Jett. He said, although an officer may exercise discretion, there is no provision under the laws of Alabama to permit possession of marijuana if the individual is from a state where it's lawful. Again, I know that we touched on that a minute ago, but we know that that Erica and her husband, Todd Prock, have said, we'll deal with that. But then you go over a little bit later in your story, and the DA, Mr. Jett, says that he's not going to list specific evidence for the chemical endangerment charges. So I think that is what has a lot of people kind of riled up, is if this is the big charge that apparently is being cited for having that child removed from custody, this chemical endangerment charge, then why are the reasons not being a little bit more spelled out? We know, again, that the DHR system is very complicated. We're aware of that. But we do know that Erica has said, look, please place him with his grandparents, with my parents in Michigan. And I believe that they also have family in Hamilton, so in Alabama. And that child was not placed with family. It was placed with a foster family. Again, DA is not listing specific evidence or details as to why he is charging that chemical endangerment charge. Important to note here that chemical endangerment charge is just a charge. It has not gone before a grand jury. So Amy, you and I were talking about this a little bit ago, and for some people, especially those of us, maybe like you and I, Amy, who live in Jefferson County or a bigger county, we are used to grand juries happening pretty often. But in a lot of these more rural counties across Alabama, like Lawrence County, grand juries don't happen that much throughout the year. We're used to them all the time in these big counties, but they only can happen a couple of times a year in a county like Lawrence. So you've got this chemical endangerment charge. If it takes months to go before a grand jury, and most, I think, of our viewers are probably aware of the court process and how long that court process is in a busier county. So then you push all of that back by not going to the grand jury. This charge could drag out for a long time. Yeah,
absolutely. In places like Lawrence County, grand jury meets 2, maybe 3 times a year. There is a chance that the charge could take quite a long time to get before that grand jury. Jett did tell me that he thought it could get to the grand jury before the end of the year. But remember, this charge happened back in March, so that's still, quite a long time for this couple to be in limbo. The mom, Erica Prock, told me that a DHR judge, which, that family court process is separate from the criminal process, has issued an order for the child to be transferred back to Michigan. So at that point, the family, will hopefully be able to move back home, even if the child is still in a DHR supervision in Michigan. They will be able to move back to their house where they've been paying rent and bills for 3 months while they've been basically living here in Alabama. But they, that's what they're hoping. And then they can sort of, I think, come back and resolve that criminal charge as it moves through the system. That it could be quite a while, but the hope is that soon the son will be transferred to Michigan to be reunited with family. And I think, when that occurs, even if the whole, ordeal isn't over for them at that point, they will feel a lot, better about being around family. They both have children that they haven't seen in Michigan, older children that they haven't seen in months. They FaceTime them, but this has really been just very difficult for this family, being unable to go back home, being really stuck here in Alabama while they deal with, this complicated process of family court and criminal court, in a small community, a county where they just are not familiar with the community. They don't have family. They have family in nearby Hamilton, but this has just been, a very difficult situation for them. And it's very complex. And I think that, they were really just passing through Alabama when this occurred. And in these rural counties, there are concerns about people coming through trafficking drugs. There are highways coming through. This car had out-of-state plates. They pulled them over. They did find some drugs there, marijuana, and they found prescription methadone. So it is entirely possible that that law enforcement, when they saw that, jumped to sort of a conclusion about, who this family was and what they were doing in Alabama. It is Erica's belief that she now needs to kind of set the record straight and explain that a lot of this was a misunderstanding. They aren't, drug traffickers passing through Moulton, that they had a small amount of marijuana, that they had her prescription treatment for substance abuse that she's been taking, now in compliance with the system for several years. And that she, thinks that they really got caught in sort of a situation where people made assumptions about who they were. And they haven't really had an opportunity to set the record straight and prove themselves to be good parents. And that's really where they're at right now, trying to really set that record straight.
Right. Well, I'm looking through some of these comments. I want to answer a couple really quick. Somebody said, I think was making sure they didn't misunderstand me, that the Procks are living in a tent, and that is the case. That was not a misunderstanding. They are living in a tent behind, and I'm reading this, my notes here from Erica's in-laws. They're living in a tent behind the in-laws trailer.
Yes, the in-laws live in a trailer. It's too small for them all to be inside of it. It's a small trailer. So, since this happened, they went ahead and just bought a tent and they've set it up outside. She said they've tried to make it as comfortable as possible, but it's summer in Alabama. So, how comfortable can that be? They've really been, they have been staying out there because there's just not room inside their in-laws' place for them to stay. But that's where they're at right now.
So that is true. They are in a tent, looking through several of these comments. Another one that I wanted to address quickly is it doesn't seem, and correct me if I'm wrong, Amy, but it doesn't seem like the charges in the criminal charges are not even necessarily top of mind for the Procks. It's really getting their son back. They've said that they'll deal with the charges and they will, again, keep in mind, Erica, she had that possession and that public intoxication charge already dropped. She's just facing that chemical endangerment one that was added later. Todd is facing the marijuana possession charge. That was not dropped. Somebody asked about jail. So I wanted to quickly address that. And again, I'm looking through my notes here, so excuse me for looking down. But the Procs did spend several days in jail. They had a hard time finding a bail bondsman who would get them out of jail because of being out of state. But then they were able to bond out of jail. So they did spend a few days in jail, but then they went into, again, living in that tent after jail.
Yes, that's all correct. They did have trouble. I think initially someone seeing someone come from out of state, there's always the worry about a flight risk. The Procs have made it clear they have no intention of leaving Alabama without their son. So, they had no intention of ever, leaving the state. But that was that can be an issue for people from out of state seeking bond.
Looking again through some of these comments here, people are asking where this is. So we're going to go over that quickly. This again was in March, and the family was they were at a Jackson Moulton. Now that's in Lawrence County. I got my little county map that I keep here out. So this is Lawrence County. I'm not sure how helpful this is, but this is the state of Alabama, and this is Lawrence County. So at the top of Alabama. If you're not familiar, I keep this map around here, and it does help in situations like that. So that's Lawrence County. So just one county up from the border with Tennessee there. So they were on their way up and out of Alabama. So just answering that, somebody too had asked about any drugs that were in Erica's system. Again, we do know that she later had those charges dropped, and she did not have any drugs in her system. Is that right, Amy? She
did not. No, she tested negative for marijuana. So she has not had any marijuana in her system. Yeah.
And somebody asked, what about alcohol? And she, I do not believe, showed any signs of having alcohol in her system either.
And no, there's nothing in the criminal record regarding alcohol. When you look at the criminal complaint, it's all marijuana. They didn't, again, the methadone was a prescription, so that is not mentioned in the criminal complaint at all. So it's all based on the marijuana, the chemical endangerment charge.
And again, I wanted to also make a quick note that this comes again on the heels of that story last week, Amy, that got a lot of people talking. And again, today, this morning, we heard some comments yesterday that Justice Clarence Thomas made. We know that he is one of the most conservative Supreme Court justices. And he made a comment actually yesterday on Monday saying that federal laws against pot may not make sense anymore because of all of the piecemeal laws in the country. So not necessarily related to this case, but an interesting topic to come up on this day. There's a lot of conversation going around nationwide about this, and this is really just an example of a lot of probably similar cases that happen here in Alabama and probably in other states who do not have, who have more conservative marijuana laws as well.
Yeah, I think what this case really shows is really the very large differences in how different states are treating marijuana. And even here in Alabama, you're seeing quite a bit of differences between the counties, even in marijuana, enforcement. You've seen counties like Jefferson County, the largest county in the state, move to kind of dismiss a lot of these or wipe these old marijuana charges out of the system, and really kind of ease up on enforcement. And yet in some of these smaller rural counties, it is still treated basically the same way that you would treat any other sort of illegal drugs, whether it would be opioids or methamphetamine. And to be clear, that is still the law in Alabama, is that it is still an illegal substance. But I think now as states move away from or move towards some decriminalization or legalization, it's just kind of making that difference between policies and parts of Alabama much starker for people. And so I think we are starting to see more and more stories like this, the veteran who was arrested with medical marijuana and ended up in prison. These cases are happening more frequently. We're hearing about them more frequently. And I think just as the policies change around the country, we may see that more and more. We know Alabama has moved to make medical marijuana legal. It'll be interesting to see how that plays out. There was opposition to that from law enforcement and DAs. So, who knows what we may see.
Right. And I was just looking through these comments and I wanted to address quickly, Renaer, he's asked about that marijuana bill. Now, Renaer, let me tell you, yes, you're right on that. Governor Ivey did sign into law a bill, but this is not for recreational marijuana use. That is for medical marijuana use. That law is going to require, we don't have the exact details at this point. They are actually creating kind of a commission to go through all of those details of that law, but that is going to be, again, solely for medical use, and they will require some sort of card or prescription and proof essentially to be able to have that. And one other question I had as well is somebody asked, how much pot did the Procs have? That is varying between 2.5 ounces to 4.5 ounces.
Yeah.
There are people who say one or the other.
So I will say that the legal documents said it was closer to 4.5 ounces, which, for one person would be more than the legal amount allowed in Michigan. But the Michigan law also says if you possess between 2.5 and 5 ounces, which would be what they had in the car, that's basically subject to a civil penalty, which is the same as like a traffic ticket.
Right.
So it's not still an arrestable offense in Michigan to have even 4.5 ounces.
Mm-hmm. And to clear that up, Bobby had said it says two different numbers in the article. And Bobby, you're right. One says 2.5 because that is what Erica claimed they had, and one says 4.5 because that is what court document said. So that's why we had both of those. And then again, one other question here that I have about Sean Worsley. I know that you mentioned, Amy, about, as we were talking about, a veteran who wound up in jail with medical marijuana, and I believe it was Lori who was asking about Sean Worsley. We have covered that case. I will leave you some links in the comments here so you can look up that case. And if y'all are interested, we will come back on another day and talk about this. So Amy, I know you and I could sit here all day and talk about this and talk about all of our other cases where we see that people in Alabama have just a hard time with, it seems like, pregnancy, motherhood, parenting, and dealing with other criminal problems. So Amy, thank you for bringing light to the situation. Thank you for reporting this. And I know we have a lot of interest in this, so I know that you will keep us updated on that front.
Yes, thank you so much, Ivana. I appreciate it. And yeah, we could talk forever, and these cases kind of continue to come up. But yeah, I will keep you updated on this one and the other one that we talked about last week with prescription pills.
Absolutely. Amy, thank you so much again. Everybody watching, thank you so much. If we didn't get to your question and you still have questions, please let me know. You can DM us or you can email Amy or myself. I will put our email addresses in the comments as well. So everybody watching, thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you.